Shalom. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahawashi, Bahashem, Rachakodash. I want to give double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, because those are the men who I learned this truth from through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahawashi. Yahweh is the true name of the God of Israel. Yahawashi is who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, but his one and only true name is Yahawashi. And pretty much this is going to be a video briefly going into Paul's citizenship as a Roman, how that got him out of trials and tribulations and persecutions. Because just like any other man of the Lord, including Yahawashi himself, Paul had a lot of false accusations that was brought up, upon him by his own people that led to physical persecution, and his life was on the line. So him having that Roman citizenship, being born in Tarsus, that got him out of a lot of persecutions and court, all right? And this is an example of when Yahushua said, use the world, but don't abuse it. See, in a situation like that, where your life is on the line, you are being wrongly accused, you being a Jew, but being born in Tarsus, which is in a Roman province, that's using wisdom. That's applying wisdom when it really counts. So check this out, right? So I typed in on Google Acts 16 Roman citizenship, right? Referring to Apostle Paul. It says in Acts 16, Paul and Silas leveraged their Roman citizenship. So Silas, he had Roman citizenship as well. Just like today, if you're born in whatever country, you have that citizenship. It says, so you get certain benefits as, a Jew having that particular country or nation's citizenship. So it says, Roman citizenship to protect themselves and validate their ministry after being beaten and imprisoned without trial in Philippi. By revealing their status, Acts 16:37, they compelled the magistrates to formally apologize. They apologized because they realized, they have Roman citizenship. And then they was thinking back in the past, on how they try to, or did persecute particular Romans, and it backfired on them. So it says, by revealing their status, Acts 16:37, it says, continued on, preventing quiet exclusion and establishing a precedent of innocence that strengthens the early church credibility. It says key aspects of citizenship in Acts 16. It says, so now it's going into the legal benefits that Paul or Silas and any Jew or individual had having Roman citizenship, right? So it says legal protections. Roman law, notably the Lex Valeria and Lex Porcia, prohibited binding or scourging a Roman citizen without a legal trial, as well as forbidding their torture. It says violated rights. Paul explicitly mentions in Acts 16:37 that they were Roman citizens, right? Cives Romani, beaten publicly while uncondemned. It says the magistrates fear. Upon discovering their mistake, the magistrates fear legal ramifications from Rome, as abusing a citizen was a severe criminal offense punishable by exile or death. Significance of the action. Paul used his citizenship not merely for personal safety, but to secure a public release, which served as a public apology for their mistreatment and prevented the new church in Philippi from being stigmatized as illegal. Status by birth. While Acts 22 and 28 clarifies Paul was born a citizen, Acts 16 shows this status function as a legal shield throughout his ministry journeys, particularly in Roman colonies like Philippi. It says, The scene in Philippi, Acts chapter 16, verses 35 through 40. The demand. Paul refuses to be released secretly, forcing the magistrates to come in person, demonstrating their error. The apology. The city officials, which is the officers, right, the centurions, it says, went to the prison, apologized for their actions, and escorted them out. The result, the public acknowledgement of their innocence allowed them to meet with fellow believers at Lydia's house before departing, giving them legitimacy. All right. So now let's get into it. So this is Acts 16, which goes into, the Philippian jailer that was an Israelite. He had faith. He received the gospel. Like when you read about Noah, his 3 children and wives got delivered. Cornelius, which is an Israelite, the angel came to him and said, you and your household is going to be delivered. The Philippian jailer. So there are examples where whether your woman believes or not, she could be saved through a man of the Lord believing. And likewise, if you got an Israelite woman that's in the truth, eventually him loving his believing woman, although he may be an unbelieving Israelite man, still in the Gentile pagan state of mind, that could change because he'll love his wife and he'll want to see like, okay, what's her belief system? What is this about? And the Lord can use that curiosity to bring him into the truth. All right. So continuing on. So this is what it's going into. So I'm not going to read the whole account. I just want to get to the point, right? Because he got converted. Because you have to be made wise unto salvation through the gift of faith, ultimately through predestination. So now, this is Acts 16 and 35. It says, and when it was day, the magistrate sent the sergeants saying, let those men go. Why? Because they have Roman citizenship. They didn't want to have problems with Rome. It says, and the keeper of the prison told this saying to Paul, the magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace. Just leave, don't cause a scene. It says, but Paul said unto them, they have beaten us openly uncondemned. What they did was against the law. You're not supposed to be beating on no Roman citizen. Even if he is a Jew, he got Roman citizenship. So now you would have a problem with the Roman government. You're going against their authority. And they was the head nation, the Edomites, and ruled during that time, right? So it says, so if the Roman government would have found this out, them magistrates and them officers, that did this to Paul, they could be exiled or killed for what they did. So it says, Acts 16:37, it says, it says, but Paul said unto them, they have beaten us openly, uncondemned, being Romans, and have cast us into prison. And now do they thrust us out privily? Nay, verily, but let them come themselves and fetch us out. And the surgeons told these words unto the magistrates, and they feared when they heard that they were Romans, because what they did was against the law. All right? These men didn't even have a trial, and you threw them in there. You went against the Roman authority. It says, and they came and besought them and brought them out and desired them to depart out of the city. It says, and they went out of the prison and entered into the house of Lydia, and when they had seen the brethren, they comforted them and departed. All right. So now let's get this real quick. So I typed in Paul, Roman citizenship, right? According to the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul was a Roman citizen by birth, a rare and privileged status amongst first century Jews that provided legal protections, including exemption from torture. Remember, his people, Paul used to always deal with persecution from his own people. All right, lying said, oh, he brought heathens into the temple. The doctrine he's spreading is causing riots. bringing false accusations against him. It says, yep, Jews that provided legal protections, including exemption from torture and the right to a trial before the emperor. He used his status to avoid illegal beatings in Philippi and appeal his case to Caesar. Key aspects of Paul's citizenship, birthright. Paul explicitly states in Acts 22 and 28 that he was born a citizen, not someone who purchased it. It says significance of Tarsus. As a native of Tarsus, a free Roman city, Paul was likely from a well-regarded family. Legal protections, right? Have a Roman citizenship. It says exemption from scourging. Paul stopped the centurion from punishing him without trial by declaring his citizenship in Acts 22, verses 25 to 29. Right to trial. As a citizen, Paul exercised his right to appeal to Caesar in Acts, the 25th chapter. Strategic utilization. Paul used his status to travel safely on Roman roads and likely to avoid local persecution. It says scholarly perspective on citizenship, debate over reliability. While some scholars dispute the historical occurrence of the account of Acts, as none of Paul's letters mention his citizenship, others point out that his appeal to Caesar is difficult to explain without it. Yeah, because he had Roman citizenship. It says verification. Authorities typically relied on verbal testimony, specialized documents, right? Or knowing the person's status to verify citizenship in this period. Key incidents in Acts. Once again, it goes into Philippi, right? Acts chapter 16, verses 37 to 38. Paul and Silas reveal they are Roman citizens after being beaten, forcing the magistrates to apologize as whipping a citizen was illegal. It says Jerusalem, Acts the 22nd chapter. Paul prevents being tortured by asking, is it illegal for you to flog, meaning beat a Roman citizen who hasn't been found guilty? Caesarea, in Acts the 25th chapter, verses 11 to 12, Paul appeals to Caesar, which allows his transport to Rome. All right? So there you go. He used their citizenship to avoid particular persecutions. This is Acts 22 and 28. It says, matter of fact, 24. Matter of fact, let's read this in the NLT version. This is Acts 22 and 24. And it's dealing with what? Paul reveals his Roman citizenship. The commander brought Paul inside and ordered him lashed with whips to make him confess his crime. He wanted to find out why the crowd had become so furious. When they tied Paul down to lash him, Paul said to the officer standing there, is it legal for you to whip a Roman citizen who hasn't even been tried? When the officer heard this, he went to the commander and asked, what are you doing? This man is a Roman citizen. So the commander went over and asked Paul, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? Yes, certainly I am, Paul replied. I am too, the commander muttered, and it cost me plenty. See? So he caught some flack in the past for this. So immediately he wants to what? Have Paul, be released or depart out of that situation. It says, Paul answered, but I am a citizen by birth. So it says, the soldiers who were about to interrogate Paul quickly withdrew when they heard he was a Roman citizen, and the commander was framed because he had ordered him bound and whipped. So although they wanted to scourge him, they wanted to beat him, this would be violating the legal protections that Paul had as a Roman citizen. Once again, Roman citizens, they had legal protection, right? Meaning what? If somebody was a Roman citizen, regardless of how the public wants them persecuted or, put to death or executed or accused of a crime, being a Roman citizen, it prohibited binding or scourging a Roman citizen, in this case Apostle Paul, without a legal trial, as well as forbidding their torture, right? It says, Paul explicitly mentions in Acts 16 and 37, once again, that they were Roman citizens, beaten publicly while uncondemned. See? So there you go. So now, let me just read this real quick. This is Acts 25 and verse, let's see. Yeah, this is Acts 25 and verse 7, NLT version. When Paul arrived, the Israelite leaders from Jerusalem gathered around and made many serious accusations they couldn't prove, right? Paul denied the charges. I am not guilty of any crime against the Israelite laws or temple or the temple or the Roman government, he said. Then Fetus, wanting to please the Jews, asked him, are you willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there? But Paul replied, no, this is the official Roman court, so I ought to be tried here, because if he would have went to Jerusalem, he wouldn't have these legal protections, being a Roman citizen. But it goes on to say, no, this is the official Roman court, so I ought to be tried right here. You know very well I am not guilty of harming the Jews. If I have done something worthy of death, I don't refuse to die. But if I am innocent, no one has a right to turn me over to these men to kill me. I appeal to Caesar. It says, Fetus conferred with his advisors and then replied, very well, you have appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar you will go. All right? So, that's pretty much it. Lord willing, we was edified by the lesson. Shalom.